I only came to fix her roof, but by the time I left that night, it felt like she had quietly fixed something in me too. I remember the day clearly, not because of the roof I came to fix, but because of the woman who stepped out onto the porch while I worked. The afternoon sun pressed down heavy, the kind that makes the air shimmer just above the shingles. My hands were chalked with dust, my shirt clinging with sweat, and I was more focused on finishing the job than anything else. But when I glanced down, I saw her standing there, leaning lightly against the railing, one hand curled around a glass of water that caught the sunlight like crystal. She looked to be in her early 40s, with a kind of presence that wasn't loud but impossible to ignore. Her dark hair was swept back neatly, though a few strands caught in the breeze and brushed her cheek. The way she carried herself was different from the women my age. Steadier, more composed, like she didn't need to try to be noticed. And maybe that's exactly why I noticed her. "Roof holding up okay?" she called up, her voice even but touched with humor, like she already knew the answer. I smiled, wiping sweat from my forehead. "For now. But a storm and you'd be in trouble." She nodded, the corners of her mouth curving in the kind of smile that felt both warm and measured. Then she held the glass up slightly. "You look like you could use this." I climbed down the ladder, my boots hitting the grass with a soft thud. When she handed me the glass, her fingers brushed against mine. Just the faintest touch, but enough to send a quick awareness through me. The water was cool, but somehow her hand had left more of an impression. "Thank you," I said, taking a sip. "You're welcome," she replied, her eyes studying me for a moment longer than polite conversation required. Not in a bold way, more like she was curious, weighing something quietly in her mind. There was a pause, the kind where neither person rushes to fill it. The breeze moved again, carrying the lightest trace of her perfume, something floral but understated. I became suddenly aware of the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, the closeness of the moment despite how ordinary it should have been. I handed the glass back, and she accepted it with a graceful nod. "Take your time up there. No need to rush." Her words sounded casual, but they lingered in the air differently, as though she wasn't just talking about the roof. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I wanted to imagine it. As I climbed back onto the roof, I caught myself glancing down again. She was still there, standing with quiet composure, her eyes lifting briefly to meet mine. For a second, it felt like the job wasn't the reason I was here at all. And that was the first moment, small, unremarkable to anyone else, but to me, it was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. By the time I set the last tool back into my bag, the sun was dipping lower, staining the sky in shades of orange and violet. The day's work had left me tired but satisfied, that kind of weariness where every muscle feels heavy but earned. I started down the steps, ready to thank her and head home, but she was already standing at the doorway, waiting. "You finished?" she asked softly, leaning against the frame. "Yeah," I said, brushing the dust from my hands. "Roof should hold up fine now. You won't need me again for a while." She tilted her head, almost as if she was considering something beyond the roof. Then, after a small pause, she spoke with a gentleness that carried more weight than the words themselves. "You shouldn't leave on an empty stomach. At least stay for dinner." I hesitated. It wasn't what I expected. Customers usually paid, maybe offered a thank you, and that was it. But the way she said it, not forceful, not casual either, left little room to politely decline. "Oh, I don't want to trouble you," I began. "You won't?" she interrupted softly, her hand coming to rest lightly on my forearm. Her touch was warm, steady, and though it lasted only a moment, it stilled my protest. Her eyes met mine, and in them was something unspoken. Part hospitality, part something else I couldn't quite name. So I nodded. "All right, dinner sounds nice." Her expression softened, almost relieved, as though she'd been hoping I would say yes. She opened the door wider, and I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of rosemary and something simmering on the stove. The air was cooler than outside, yet the space carried a kind of warmth that came not from the temperature but from the way it was kept. tidy yet lived in, with books stacked on the table and a soft throw draped across the couch. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "It won't take long." I sat, my hands resting awkwardly in my lap at first. From where I was, I could see her moving about the kitchen, sleeves rolled slightly, the ease in her motions like someone who'd done this countless times. There was a quiet rhythm to it, the clink of plates, the simmering sound from the stove, the faint hum she gave under her breath when she thought I wasn't listening. I found myself watching, not out of rudeness but out of a strange curiosity. She carried herself with a grace I wasn't used to, not trying to impress, not rushing, just steady and sure. And yet, there was something else beneath it, a faint hesitance in her eyes when she'd glance my way, as if she too was aware of the unspoken weight between us. When she finally set a plate before me, she smiled in that quiet, composed way of hers. "You've worked hard. Eat." Her hand brushed the edge of the table near mine as she sat down across from me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel her nearness, like the warmth of a fire you don't need to lean into to feel. And as I lifted my fork, I realized dinner here wasn't about food at all. It was about being asked to stay. The first few bites passed in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but carried the quiet awareness of two people still figuring each other out. The food was simple. Roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, seasoned just enough to draw out their natural flavors. But somehow, sitting there at her table, it tasted richer than anything I'd eaten in weeks. She cut her chicken delicately, her movements graceful, while I tried not to seem too aware of the way her presence filled the small space. The golden light of the setting sun slipped through the window behind her, softening the angles of her face and turning her hair into something almost luminous. "So," she said after a moment, setting her fork down lightly, "do you do this kind of work full-time? Roofs? Repairs?" I nodded. "Mostly. Steady enough. Not glamorous, but I like working with my hands. It feels honest, you know?" Her eyes lifted, meeting mine across the table. There was something in her gaze. Not pity, not judgment, just interest. "That's rare," she said softly. "Most people chase titles, money, status. You sound like you value something different." I shrugged, feeling strangely exposed. "Maybe. I just don't see the point in pretending I'm meant for something else. I like fixing things." A small smile tugged at her lips. There's something admirable in that. Simple but meaningful. The way she said it made warmth bloom in my chest. For a moment, I forgot about the food entirely. I asked about her life, and for a second I thought she might deflect. But then she sighed, resting her elbow lightly on the table, chin balanced in her hand. "I used to work in publishing. Long hours, endless deadlines. Took everything out of me. Eventually, I stepped away." Her tone carried a shadow I couldn't ignore, and I leaned in slightly without realizing it. "Do you miss it?" She paused, eyes lowering to the rim of her wine glass. "Sometimes, but what I miss more is who I thought I was back then." I kept pushing forward, thinking success would mean happiness. It didn't. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the quiet ache of truth she rarely shared. I didn't want to break it carelessly. Instead, I reached for my glass, letting the clink of glassware be the soft bridge back into conversation. "You seem happier here," I said gently. Her eyes flicked back up, studying me, surprised at the observation. A soft laugh escaped her, low and unguarded. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just learning to breathe again." Something in her laugh stayed with me. Not loud or showy, but genuine, like it slipped out before she could stop it. And in that moment, sitting across from her, I felt closer than I should have, like I'd been allowed into a part of her life that didn't open easily to strangers. By the time the plates were empty, the food was almost an afterthought. What filled me wasn't just the meal. It was her presence, her voice, her laughter still lingering in the air like the last notes of a song you don't want to end. After dinner, she rose from the table, gathering our plates with the same quiet grace she carried through everything. I offered to help, but she shook her head gently. You've worked enough for one day. Sit, please. I obeyed, settling onto the couch in the living room while she moved in the kitchen. The house felt different now. Earlier, it had been just walls and furniture, but after sharing that meal and those words, the space seemed to hum with a kind of intimacy, as if I was no longer just a guest but someone allowed to see the softer corners of her life. From the couch, I could hear the clink of dishes, the soft rush of running water. When she returned, she carried 2 mugs, steam rising in gentle curls from each. Chamomile, she said, offering one to me. Good for winding down. Our fingers brushed as I took it. That small contact again. Fleeting, but enough to spark something restless in my chest. She sat beside me, not across the room, not in an armchair, but right there on the same couch. The cushion dipped under her weight, tilting me slightly toward her. Our knees nearly touched, only an inch or two apart, and suddenly the room felt smaller, the air thicker. For a while we didn't speak. The only sounds were the faint patter of rain that had begun against the windows and the occasional soft clink of ceramic as we lifted our mugs. It wasn't silence in the uncomfortable sense. It was charged, deliberate, like both of us were listening for something that wasn't being said. Finally, she broke it. It's been a long time since I had company for dinner, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her tea. I glanced at her. The line of her profile softened in the dim glow of the lamp. I'm glad you asked me, I replied honestly. She looked at me then, her gaze lingering, searching. There was something in her eyes. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of longing mixed with restraint. The kind of look someone gives when they've built careful walls but are tempted, for once, to let them down. I shifted slightly, setting my mug on the table. My hand brushed against the fabric of the couch, just an inch from hers. I didn't move closer, didn't press the moment, but I knew she felt it too. The rain outside grew steadier, drumming softly against the glass. Inside, the air seemed to thrum with something unspoken. I could feel her presence beside me, not through touch, but through awareness. The warmth of her body, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the way her shoulder angled ever so slightly toward me. When our eyes met again, it was different. Neither of us looked away right away. The seconds stretched, heavy and fragile, as though the wrong word might break whatever fragile thread was forming between us. And in that quiet, I realized the tension wasn't something to run from. It was something to be felt, slowly, carefully, like the beginning of a storm you wanted to stand beneath, just to see where it would lead. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping gently against the windows like a soft drumbeat. The lamplight in the corner cast a warm glow over the living room, wrapping everything in a cocoon of golden stillness. We sat side by side, our tea mugs cooling on the table, the silence between us no longer just quiet. It was heavy with something waiting to be spoken. She was the one who broke it. Her voice was low, almost tentative, as if she was speaking more to herself than to me. I don't usually let people in. I turned to her, studying the way her hands twisted gently in her lap. She wasn't meeting my eyes. For someone who had carried herself with such calm composure all evening, this small tremor of vulnerability felt like an unveiling. Why not? I asked softly. Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Because it's easier not to. When you've lived long enough, you learn how quickly people can take pieces of you and leave. And at some point, you just stop offering. Her words sank deep, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I could feel the weight of her confession, not just in her voice, but in the way she held her shoulders, the guarded steadiness in her tone. I get that, I finally said, but, for what it's worth, being here tonight, it doesn't feel like something I'd ever want to walk away from. That made her look at me, really look. Her eyes, softened by the lamplight, searched mine as if testing whether I meant it. Whatever she found there, it seemed to disarm her. I don't know why, she whispered, but I feel strangely at peace with you, like I don't have to keep pretending. The words pulled something raw in me. I didn't think about it. I just moved, reaching out slowly until my hand brushed against hers. My fingers barely touched her skin at first, testing the space between courage and caution. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand turned slightly, her fingertips grazing against mine, a silent permission that sent a warm ache through my chest. We stayed like that, hands not fully clasped, but connected. It was such a simple touch, and yet it felt more intimate than anything else could have in that moment. Her breath caught, just faintly, as if she hadn't expected to allow it. And I realized then that it wasn't just about the touch, it was about trust. About letting someone step past the walls she had so carefully built. "I don't know what this is," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her control. "Neither do I answered honestly, my thumb brushing the side of her hand in the gentlest motion I could manage. "But I know I don't want it to end." The rain carried on outside, steady and constant. But in that living room, time itself seemed to still. It was just her and me. Two people on different paths, meeting in a fragile, unexpected crossing. And in the quiet, we both let it be enough. At some point, the rain faded into a soft drizzle, and the quiet inside the house shifted. The lamps still glowed warmly, the tea mug sat forgotten on the table, and her hand still rested near mine, close enough that I could feel her presence even without touching. But the hour had grown late, and I knew I couldn't stay forever, no matter how much some part of me wanted to. I cleared my throat gently. "I should probably get going." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her lap, as though weighing something she wasn't ready to admit. Then she nodded slowly, her composure returning, though I caught the flicker of reluctance in her eyes. Rising from the couch, I slipped on my jacket. She walked with me to the door, her steps unhurried, almost stalling, as though each one carried the quiet wish to prolong the moment. At the doorway, I turned to face her. The porch light spilled over us, softer than the lamps inside, throwing a golden halo across her hair. For a moment, we simply stood there. The world around us hushed, the night air cool against my skin. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for dinner, and for letting me stay a little longer than just for the roof." Her lips curved in the smallest of smiles, but her eyes betrayed more warmth, uncertainty, and something else that neither of us dared to name aloud. "It was nice," she murmured. "Nicer than I expected." Her hand lifted almost unconsciously, brushing lightly against my arm. It was such a small touch, but it lingered, her fingers resting there a moment longer than they needed to. Without thinking, I placed my hand gently over hers. The contact was soft, steady, not grasping, not demanding, but holding. Our eyes locked, and in that instant words felt unnecessary. Everything I wanted to say was there in the silence. "I don't want to go. I don't want this to be just one night." She didn't move her hand away. If anything, she let it rest there, her thumb brushing faintly against the fabric of my sleeve, as if memorizing the moment before it slipped away. The quiet stretched, heavy and fragile. I could feel the tension between us, not the sharp kind, but the tender kind, born from all the things neither of us was ready to voice. Finally, she drew in a breath, her lips parting as though she might say something. But instead, she just smiled faintly and whispered, "Good night." Reluctantly, I let her hand go, the absence of her touch immediate, almost aching. I stepped outside, the night air cool and damp with the last traces of rain. She lingered in the doorway, framed by the warm glow of her home, watching as I walked down the path. When I turned back one last time, her eyes were still on me. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke, but everything was said in that lingering look. And as I walked away, I knew the night wasn't an ending. It was only a pause. The night air felt cool against my skin as I stepped away from her porch. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind the fresh, earthy scent that lingers after a storm. My boots pressed softly against the damp path, each step carrying me farther from her door, though my heart tugged stubbornly in the opposite direction. I told myself it was just dinner, just a kind gesture after a long day's work, but it hadn't felt like just anything. The taste of her laughter still echoed in my ears, the warmth of her hand still lingered against mine, and the image of her, framed in the golden glow of the doorway, was burned into me like something I knew I'd carry for a long time. "Good night," she had whispered, but to me it hadn't felt like an ending. Halfway down the path, I paused, unable to resist turning back. She was still there, standing just inside the doorway. Her arms were folded lightly against her chest, but her posture wasn't closed. She looked, waiting, watching, and then, almost hesitantly, she called out. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the night, I heard every word. "You'll come by again, won't you?" The question struck me with a quiet force. It wasn't playful and it wasn't casual. Beneath it lay something vulnerable, an invitation wrapped in hesitation, as though she wasn't used to asking, wasn't used to needing. I felt a slow smile curve across my lips. "Yeah," I said, my voice carrying back to her. "I will." Her expression softened in a way that made the entire night worth it. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw the weight she carried slip, just a little. The composed woman who had stood watching me from the porch that afternoon now looked almost relieved, as if the promise of tomorrow was something she hadn't dared to expect. I turned again, walking into the night, but everything in me felt lighter. My chest ached in a way that wasn't pain, but anticipation. The roof I had fixed earlier already seemed like a distant memory. What lingered wasn't the work I'd done, but the connection we'd found. Each step away felt temporary, as though the distance was only meant to make the return sweeter. And in that quiet walk under the damp night sky, I knew with absolute certainty that I would see her again. Not as a worker, not as a stranger, but as someone she had chosen to let in. The night closed around me, calm and cool, but inside, there was a quiet fire burning. It wasn't the kind that blazed wildly, demanding to be fed. No, this was slower, steadier. A flame that promised it would last, if only we were careful enough to protect it. And somehow I knew she felt it too, because good nights don't usually come with questions about tomorrow, unless tomorrow already matters. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow burn romances. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed for dinner, too?